I will say good morning. Good morning. It is a great zechus, Baruch Hashem, to be able to continue the daf with all of you today. I'm sorry that I'm not there with you in person. Good reason, Baruch Hashem, traveling to Eretz Yisrael for a short trip. But I really, my intention for this week is Am Yisroel not to miss a day of shir with the Chevra. I'm hoping that Am Yisroel I'll be able to honor that Kabbalah. It's the highlight of my day to be able to learn with all of you. And although I prefer to do it in person, Baruch Hashem, just the opportunity to learn together, to connect together, and to share Torah together is a tremendous zechus. So thank you again. I wanna stay connected in Yisroel even if I'm not geographically present, and look forward to a beautiful week of learning together. Thank all of our TALMUD Torah sponsors. Thank our annual TALMUD Torah sponsor for Tafshin Pehei, the Tilson Mishpacha, as a zechus for besuros, tovos for Am Yisroel. Our TALMUD Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev, Josh and Becca Friedman in commemoration of the Yahrzeit of Josh, his father, Yisroel Yehuda ben HaRav Chaim Rephael, for the safe return of our hostages and the security of all of our chayalim. Sammy and Malka Esterson in memory of their parents, Ludwig Stiefel, Sarah Stiefel, and Hinda Esterson, Zechron in memory of their dear friend, brave soldier, beloved husband and father, Naftali Gordon, Naftali Yonah Hy, Ben Beatrice, Miriam, and Daniel Yigal. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Torah, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, and indeed Chadash Baruch Hu will bring home our hostages, B'Shalom and B'Karov, and allow our holy soldiers to be successful. B'Chol Ma'aseh Yadehem. I will say, we have an incredible daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Kuf Samech Zayin 167, and we are actually picking up 3 lines down from the top. Amar Abaye. So the Gemara says as follows: Amar Abaye, Hayman de boy lemechuye chasimos yadei bebeidina. So Abaye says like this: let's say a person, you have a witness, and the witness wants to attest to the veracity of his signature. So, for example, let's say again there's Ruvain, right? And there's a signature or there's a document that is presented in Beis Din that has Ruvain's signature on it. So Beis Din wants to do a kiyum shtaris. Beis Din wants to make sure that it's legit. So they'll invite Ruvain in and they'll say, Ruvain, sign on a piece of paper, verify that it's your signature. Okay. The Rashbam writes over here, he says, Amra Abaye, lo lehavi inish chasime yadei, a little bit of a different girsa. Adam shetzarach lichtov chasima sedo aklaf ulahashlich lebeis din. So really, the way Rashba understands it over here is like this: there's a shtar that has Ruvain on it as an aid. Ruvain is not present in order to go ahead and identify his signature, so he sends in a handwriting sample to Beis Din, and Beis Din will uphold the signature in that way. So Abaye says, if you're writing your signature on a piece of paper, make sure to write it on the top of the paper, right? If somebody's writing their signature in order to have their signature verified in Beis Din, now the truth is, it's whether the fact that it's being verified in Beis Din is not really the ikar part of here. What Abaye essentially is saying is like this: anytime you're just stam signing your name, and again, the most common case for that would be signature verification, sign on the top of the piece of paper, not below. Why not? So the Gemara says, Lo dehavi besof migilta, don't sign on the bottom of the document, right? Dilma mashkach le'achar v'kasav demasik bezuze. What are we concerned about? It's actually very interesting. If Ruvain were to go ahead and sign on the bottom of the shtar or bottom of a document, remember again, or a piece of paper, again, remember, Ruvain has signed on a document. Beis Din is coming to validate or to certify that indeed it is Ruvain who has signed on this document. So they want Ruvain to give a signature example. So now Abaye is saying, Ruvain, if you're going to sign your signature on a blank piece of paper, do it on the top of the piece of paper and not on the bottom. What's the concern? The concern is, Dilma mashkech le'acher, maybe somebody else, if Ruvain signs on it, let's say Shimon finds the piece of paper, and on it says Ruvain ben Yaakov. So what could Shimon do? He could exploit this, ukasiv demasik bezuze. If Shimon wants to exploit this, he could do like this. If he finds a piece of paper with Ruvain's signature on it, that says Ruvain ben Yaakov, Shimon could write, I, Shimon, lent Ruvain $1,000. And then on the bottom of that shtar, it says Ruvain ben Yaakov. And the Gemara says, Utnan, Holtzi alav k'sav yadu shu chayiv lo govem benechasim benechorin. It's actually an interesting halacha that if a lender produces a document that says, right, Ruvain produces or Shimon produces a document that says that he lent money to Ruvain, and on the bottom of the document it is signed Ruvain ben Yaakov. It has that actual signature on it. Halacha l'maisa, that becomes a usable document for collection purposes, right? In other words, he could go ahead and use that for collection because halacha l'maisa, Halacha l'maisa, it has the signature of the borrower on it. So quite a fascinating idea. So therefore this is exploitable. Because it's exploitable, therefore Rabbi says it's very simple. Don't write your signature on the bottom of the document, because then someone can write something on top of it, but rather, again, write on the top of the document. So again, the only time that it could be exploited is if you could put text on top of the signature. But if there's no text on top of the signature, then by definition, you can nothing to exploit over here. Interesting idea. Also interesting, this idea of Hotzialav Ksav Yodashu Chayav L'Govim Nechasim Nechorin. Right? So if Shimon produces a document that says that he lent Reuven $1,000, and Reuven's signature is on that document, that is a valid document. It's a valid loan document. Now, it's only valid enough to be able to collect from the Chasim B'nei Chorin, unencumbered property. It's not strong enough to go ahead and collect from encumbered property, because remember, again, there's no formal eidos, there's no formal testimony on it, but nevertheless, it can be exploited. Okay, Gemara tells the story. Hahu bazibno, or basbino. There was a basbino. Now, what's a basbino? The Rashbam says over here, basbino, muchas v'Yisroel hava, a tax collector. And this was a Jewish tax collector. So the Jewish tax collector came before Abaye. Amarle, nechsili marchasimas yadei, dechi asura. So listen to this. So the tax collector says to Abaye, would you mind sign on the shtar for me? Just put your signature. I want to see your signature. Why does the tax collector want to see Abaye's signature? Listen to this. So what happens? See, under certain circumstances, rabbinic scholars were exempt from taxes. So remember, in order to claim being a rabbinic scholar, you need someone to vouch for that. So what would happen? So sometimes they would go ahead and they would come with like a certificate that was that was signed by Abaye. So the tax collector says, okay, I just want to make sure that if I see your signature, that way when I see your signature on these tax exempt, it's like a parsonage. When I go ahead and I see your signature on these tax exempt certificates, I'll know that indeed it is correct. So he wanted a signature sample from Abaye. So what happens? So and again, literally translated, Dechi Asu Rabbanon, because when the rabbis come and they claim that they're Talmidei Chacham and therefore tax exempt, and they present a document with your signature on it, Machvuli Ma'abarna Lahu B'lo Machsa. I'll let them go. I'll let them cross over without paying the tax. So what happens? Abaye said, no problem. So Abaye starts to sign, and he starts to sign on the top of the piece of parchment, in line with what we just learned before, that if you are writing your signature on a blank piece of paper, don't write on the bottom, only write on the top. So Abaye started signing on the top. What happened? The tax collector was trying to pull the paper up a little bit. So obviously he was trying to exploit the situation. He was trying to get Abaye to sign a little bit lower down. So he was pulling the paper up, albeit a little bit slowly. Abaye says to the guy, okay, I got your number. The rabbis already preceded you. In other words, the rabbis already knew about people like you who would try to go ahead and cheat. And that's why, again, I'm dafka signing on the top of the paper. Okay, incredible. Abaye says as follows. Another interesting halacha. Mitlas va'ad eser lo lichtu b'sov shita. Shabbos said this is fascinating. Reuven lends Shimon money. Abaye says like this. When writing the amounts in the shtar, if the amount ends with the number from between the number 3 and 10, do not write the numbers 3 through 10, or 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 on the end of a line. Now why? Because it could be excluded. Now why is that? Dilma mezayiv v'kasav. Now what's going on over here? Take a look at the Rashbam. The Rashbam is about 10 lines up from before it becomes wide. Amr Abaye mitlas va'ad yud lo lichtov b'sof shita. De mezayiv v'kasav litlas Tilson. Now watch this. You could take, let's say it said that Reuven lent Shimon 3 golden dinars. So tlas is taf, lamed saf. Right? Now remember, if that word is written at the end of the line, so Reuven could exploit it. And what could he do? He could add in another yud and nun. And suddenly again, tlas becomes tlasin, which is 30. Same idea. If let's say again, he lent him 4 gold dinarim, arba could become arba'in, 40. Chamesh, 5, could become chamshin. And this could, again, you could do this with all of the numbers between 3 and 10. After 10 already, it's not going to happen, because after 10, the way things are written, for example, achadasar eni ochal is a yufei ditzarach lemichtav echad ve'esrim. So again, after you get past 10, you write the smaller number first and then 10 afterwards. Okay, so Abaye therefore says, but if let's say you've lent or you're selling something and the number that you're using is between 3 and 10, Don't write 3 through 10 on the end of a line because it can be easily exploited. Interesting. The es ramile. Now, what happens if that happens? Sometimes you're writing a star, you're not paying attention, or you are paying attention. Just the way it comes out is that you end up writing a number at the end of the line. What should you do? Nahadri ledibure train tlasa zimni after the lo misrami le be'emtza shita. So essentially, repeat the information. Make sure to restate the information. He says either 2 or 3 times throughout the shtar, because this way, at some point, you'll end up getting that information in the middle of a line. And once you get in the middle of a line, then it's no longer really exploitable. Okay. Incredible. Gemara tells the story. Hahu de havakase be tilsa bepardesa. So listen to this case. Reuven sold Shimon a field. And the way it worked is the field was 1/3, right? 1/3 of Reuven's pardes, 1/3 of his orchard. So Reuven says, I sold you a field that is 1/3 of my orchard. Tilsa bepardesa. What happened? Shimon manipulated the shtar. Azal machki legage de beis, vikare b'shavia upardesa. So what did Shimon do? Shimon erased the top of the beis and the bottom of the beis. What happens when you erase the top and the bottom of a beis? You're left with what appears to be a vav. Now the problem is the way the shtar reads is the tlasa tilsa upardesa. What it makes it sound like now is that Reuven sold Shimon a third of something, a third of some field, and the orchard. Remember, what Reuven sold him was a field that was 1/3 of the orchard. By making the beis into a vav, Shimon made it sound like Reuven sold him a field, a tilsa, a third of something, and the entire orchard. So what happened? So this case came before Rabbi. Rabbi said, that's strange. Amarle, my taima ravach le alma lahai vav. So Abaye said, now here's what's interesting. So as much as Shimon was able to erase the top and bottom of the beis and leave it as a vav, it was a problem because the vav of upardesa was very far from, or was a little further from the rest of the word, which makes sense, right? Because originally it was a beis, which means again there would have been that you need a beis and a pay. Now that you erase the top and the bottom of the beis, you're left with a vav, but the vav is at a distance from the rest of the word. So Abai says, wow, it's really strange. Why would somebody write the vav at such a distance? Kaf saying they tied the guy up, they tied Shimon up, va'odi, and ultimately again Shimon admitted. Okay, so they put him under duress, and Shimon admitted that he had manipulated the shtar. Hahu davakasev be manas Reuven b'Shimon achi. So okay, another case. Reuven had a shtar, and in the shtar it was written that Reuven bought the parcel of property from Reuven and Shimon, who were brothers. Okay, so he was buying property from Reuven and Shimon. Right? Apparently it was like a state property, and Reuven and Shimon were brothers. So he bought Reuven and Shimon's property. Reuven and Shimon's brothers, their property. What happened? What did Reuven? What did the buyer do? So the buyer haviluhu acha dishmei achi. Now, interestingly enough, Reuven and Shimon had a third brother, and their third brother was named Achi. Okay, so what did the purchaser do? Azol v'kasev be vav v'shavye v'achi. So the purchaser wrote in a vav before the word achi. So now it said, I, the purchaser, purchased the land of Reuven, Shimon, v'achi. Originally it said I purchased land from Reuven and Shimon, who are brothers. Now by putting in the vav, by putting the vav in there, it said Reuven, Shimon, v'achi, which sounds like now the purchaser bought the lands from all 3 brothers. So the Gemara says, so they brought this case before Abaye. Amarle, my time adachikle alma lahai vav kulehai. So Abaye says, wow, the vav is like stuck in there. Like what? Why is it so? Because obviously, again, he slid the vav in there. There was no vav. It just said achi. He slid the vav in there. So Abaye is like, why is the vav so close to the achi? To which the Gemara says, my time adachikle alma lahai vav kulehai. So the Gemara says, kaf seva ode. So sure enough, they tied the guy up, and he admitted that he had fraudulently manipulated the shtar. Incredible. So there was a shtar that came to Beis Din, and the 2 witnesses on the shtar were Rava and Rav Ada bar Ada. So ultimately, again, they brought the shtar before Rava. Amarle din chasimos yada didehi mihu kame drav acha bar Ada lo chasimi limi olam. So it's interesting. So Rava said, that is my signature. That's absolutely my signature. But I can tell you, I never ever signed on a shtar with Rav Acha bar Ada. We never signed on a shtar together. So Rav was like, that is definitely my signature, but I don't know, somebody forged my signature. Sure enough, what happened? Kaf seva odeh. They tied up the guy, the person who made the shtar, and it turned out that he admitted that he had gone ahead and fraudulently he had forged Rava's signature. So listen to this. So Rava says to the forger, Amalei, Bishlama Didi Zayafta. So I understand, okay, obviously you were able to study my signature and you were able to go ahead and forge it. So apparently Rav Adabar Ava, whatever the situation was, his hands were very shaky, whatever the particular condition was. So Rava was intrigued. I understand how you could replicate my signature, but how can you replicate the signature of Adabar Ava whose hands are so shaky? So listen to this. Amar Anchi Yadai Amitzra. So the forger said, you know what I did is I put my hand, so the Rosh Chodesh explains there was like a bridge, like a footbridge that goes across the river. The bridge has ropes that you hold on to as the, it's like the poles, no, not the poles, like the banisters that you hold. There's a better word, but okay, it'll come to me. It's the support that you hold as you walk across. So it's obviously very shaky. So the guy said, I put my hand on the rope and I signed like that. So by definition, my hand was shaky. And I guess it passed well enough to be the signature of Adabar Ava. Others say, Kam Azarnuka because of. Others say he literally, again, Azarnuka, the Rashbam says over here, Shebodolin min habar, right? Ultimately, a bucket. So interesting if he was balancing himself on a bucket, and I guess when you're balancing yourself on a bucket, you move around a lot, and he signed the shtar like that. So you definitely have to give the guy credit for being determined. See, they're putting his hand on a bridge and shaking it like, he shook like that, or he was standing on a bucket, and the bucket moved also, and that's how his hand shook. Incredible. But it's also interesting to point out this idea that when people want to cheat, they're going to find a way to cheat. And you could put in, whatever measures you want to try to prevent it. But when people are determined, they're going to find a way to cheat. Again, these stories, the cheaters were discovered. But it's interesting. I think what it also teaches is, to me, the tremendous Musar Haskell in this is, you see the lengths to which this guy went to forge Rav Adabar Ava's signature, right? The chachma to hold on to the rope on the bridge, and to shake your hands, you go ahead and you sign like that, or to balance yourself on a bucket. You got to give the guy a lot of credit. It's a lot of chachma. So we'll say, if you think about it, a lot of times we put in a lot of effort to sin. In other words, that when there's a good avera, there's something I want to do, I'm really willing to put in the effort, and something that's important to understand, because if I'm able to put in effort for Averos, that means I have the koach, that means I have the ability, that means I have the resolve. And if I could just take that same energy and rechannel it towards something great, there's no telling what I could accomplish. And we all have situations like that, where I wanted to do something that was wrong, and it wasn't easy, but I did it, I got through it. And if I could do it l'ra, then Allah has kama v'kama, I could do it l'tov. Incredible. All right, let's do the Mishnah. Kosin get li'ish afa pishin ishta imo. So the halach is you could write a get for a man. So right, Reuven's married to Rachel. Reuven wants to divorce Rachel. You could write a get for Reuven even if Rachel is not there with him. Now the Rashbam explains it's not really such a chiddush. Why not? Because l'maisa, a get could be given, a woman could be divorced against her will. So because of that, technically speaking, it doesn't matter if she's there for the process or not. So if Reuven says he wants to divorce his wife, he has the ability to do so even without her consent. And therefore, Allah L'maisa, she doesn't have to be present when he writes the get. Incredible. Similarly, again, a receipt. A receipt is what a woman gets after ksuva has been paid out. So you could write the receipt for Rachel, even though Reuven is not with her. Now, what's the logic for that? Because remember, again, it's in other words, it's in Reuven's best interest to have a receipt, because then it's paid off. For Rachel, she's the one who is a little bit more dangerous. If she didn't really get paid off and she's drafting a receipt, so l'maisa, again, she could potentially forfeit her ksuva. So for Allah l'maisa, there's nothing to lose by writing the receipt, even if the husband is not there. As long as the sofer recognizes everyone. Now again, we'll see in the Gemara exactly what that means. Fine. And furthermore, again, when it comes to a get, so we'll see also, it sounds like this is talking about the get. Whether or not this is a shover, receipt as well, but certainly at least with the get, a husband is the one who is responsible for paying the sofer. Excellent. I will say Amud Beis, Kof Samach Sayin Amud Beis 167b. You can write a loan document for the borrower even if the lender is not present with him, which again, makes a lot of sense. Why? Because Lamaisa, again, why is the borrower going to lie? That he owes someone money doesn't make any sense. So obviously he's the one being put at risk if he's writing a fraudulent document, because now he's going to owe money. So Lamaisa, we could go ahead and write a loan document even if the lender is not there. But conversely, we do not write a document for a lender unless, of course, the borrower is present. Because obviously, again, can you imagine? Reuven writes up a document that says that Shimon owes him $10,000. Maybe that transaction never happened. So therefore, he can't write up a loan. So the borrower, if the borrower wants to initiate the writing of the document, he could do it even if the lender is not with him. But the lender cannot do it unless, of course, the borrower is present. And it is the borrower who pays for the drafting of the document, which again makes sense because Bepashtas, it's the borrower who needs the money. So because he needs the money, he is one who's responsible to pay for the drafting of the document. Kosvin shtar lamocher, afa pi shein lokeach imo. We can write a document for a seller, even though the purchaser is not with him. So we'll say, so once again, essentially what you begin to see is, you can write a document for someone when the document puts them at a disadvantage and the other person's not at this. So go ahead. So in other words, a seller wants to write a document that Reuven sold a field to Shimon, fine. And Shimon, the purchaser, is not there, but Reuven's there. Shimon has nothing to lose in all of this. Only Reuven has something to lose. And therefore, we could draft it even without the presence of Shimon. However, but of course, the reverse is, the opposite is not true. You don't write a document for a purchaser unless, of course, the seller is present, right? Because Lamaisa, Shimon could say, Reuven sold me the field. Meanwhile, Reuven has no idea who Shimon is. So in order that Shimon not exploit this, therefore, Lamaisa, you can't write a document for the purchaser unless, of course, the seller is present. And it is the purchaser who pays for the drafting of the document. You can only write documents of Erusin and Isuin, marriage documents, only with the consent of both parties. Both parties, and that's interesting. The Rashbam says, Avia Chasan va'avia Kala. See, understands the parties over here are the father of the Chasan, father of the Kala. Okay? Va'chasan no sein schar. And it is the Chasan who pays for the drafting of the marriage documents. Then kosvin shtar arisos v'kablonos elamidashneim. Furthermore, again, you can only go ahead and write these as sharecropping agreements. Different types of sharecropping agreements. So the Rashbam says, Shtari Arisos is Mekabel Sadal Mechza or Shish Ravia. So a typical sharecropper will be, right, Reuven becomes a sharecropper for Shimon. Reuven will get a certain percentage of the field, or he'll pay a certain percentage of the field. Kablonos usually is measured in how much produce you have to pay. So it's percentage versus produce. Okay, but same idea. So you can go in kos and shtar risos v'kablonos elamidashneim. So both parties, the owner of the field and the sharecropper, both have to be present in order to draft the document. V'mekabel no sein schar. But it is the mekabel. Mekabel is the sharecropper himself, is the one who pays for the document. In other words, it is always the person who benefits from the document that ultimately, again, has to pay for it. Excellent. Ein kosvin shtari berurin v'chol ma'aseh bezdin ela midas shneim u'shneim nosnin schar. So we'll see what this is in the Gemara, right? A shtar berurin, we'll discuss what that is. And for that matter, any ma'aseh bezdin, any document that is part of a bezdin proceedings is only done with the consent and knowledge of both parties, and both parties split the cost of the shtar. Now again, what exactly that means, what that's referring to, in Meretz Hashem we will see. Rabbi Shmuel says, "L'shneihem omer l'shneihem kosvin." Rabbi Shmuel omer l'shneihem kosvin shnayim zeh liatzmo v'zeh liatzmo. So we'll see exactly in the Gemara. Take a look at the Rashbam. Shneim ha'idim kosvin shtei shtaros l'zeh echad u'l'zeh echad. So Shmuel makes it sound like that Allah L'maisa in some of these cases. In some of these cases, each party gets his own shtar. Again, we'll see in the Gemara exactly what that is referring to, which case has a reference to. Beautiful. All right, so now let's analyze. Remember again, the Mishnah said, one of the first things the Mishnah said is that halacha l'maisa, you could write a get for a man, even if his wife is not with him, right? You could write a receipt for a woman that she got paid for a ksuva, even if her husband is not with her, or bilvad sheyichyeh makiron. As long as the sofer recognizing, the Eidim recognized. So what does that mean? My obilvad shema kirin. What does that mean? As long as the sofer recognizes them. So the Gemara says, Am Yehuda Amarav obilvad sheyichyeh makir shem ha'ish beget v'shem ha'isha b'shover. So we'll say, so again, halacha l'maisa, If you look at the Rashbam says, Shehei Makir Shema Ish Beget, HaSofer Va'edim Tzrichen Shiakiru Shezehu Shmo. De'ikal Amechash in get Ze Elalish Acher V'yavol L'Ramos. So we'll say, so again, in order to be able to do this, right, Reuven comes along, and Reuven says, I want to divorce my wife, Rachel. So the halach is the sofer could write it, and the Eidim are allowed to go ahead and sign on it, but provided that both the witnesses and the sofer recognize the name of the husband in the get. They know this guy. So the Gemara says, similarly again, if Rachel shows up, she says, I want the receipt for my ksuva. We could write the receipt for the ksuva. So as long as what? As long as halacha l'maisa, the witnesses and the sofer recognize this woman. So the Gemara says, Yosef Rav Safar, Racha Bar Rav Huna Bar Chinena, the Yosef Abayi Gabayu. So all of these Rabbanim were sitting together. Rav Safra, Rav Acha Bar Huna, Rav Huna Bar Chinena, and Abayi was sitting with them as well. They come Bailu, and he asked the following question: Shem ha'ish beget in Shem ha'ish alo. So this is interesting because this makes it sound like the only thing that the witnesses really have to be aware of is the name of the husband. And as long as they know the name of the husband, we're good. We're good. We don't need anything else. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. Don't you also have to know the name of the wife? Like, don't you have to recognize both parties involved over here? So the Gemara says, after all, So the Gemara Shema Ish Beget in Shema Ish Alo. So all you have to know, right? Shema Isha B'Shover in Shema Ish Lo. And as we'll say, the Pashtos, we would assume that before the Sover writes this get, or he writes the shover, and before the Eidim do anything with it, but Pashtos is not just enough to recognize the name of the husband in the get and the name of the wife in the receipt, but rather by Pashtos, you should have to recognize everyone. No, you should have to know who everyone is in all of these transactions. Again, if you're going to write a get for a guy, right? Let's say there's a guy, Shimon, right? And Shimon is married to Rachel. So I don't understand. So you're just going to write a get for Shimon, even though you don't recognize the name of his wife in the get? What's to stop him from exploiting that, taking this get, handing it to another woman whose name is Rachel, who also happens to be married to a Ruvain? She could produce this guy. She could, look, here's a get. My husband's name is Ruvain, my wife is Rachel. I'm a divorced woman. It's easily exploitable. So the Gemara says, perhaps the witnesses will write a get because they know Ruvain, but they don't know the wife. And Ruvain will give this get to someone else's wife. In other words, someone else who has the same name as his wife and has the same name as him. To which the Gemara says, "V'zimnin." Furthermore, "V'zimnin azla kasva isha shover v'yava legavra delav dila." And what could happen? Sometimes, let's say Rachel shows up in Beis Din, and Rachel says, "Okay, I want you to write me a receipt." So they write a receipt that Rachel received her ksuva from Ruvain. So now I will say, after the receipt is written, who gets the receipt? The husband gets it. What's to stop Rachel from going in and giving this receipt to another husband named Ruvain, whose wife is named Rachel as well? In other words, this is exploitable. If you don't know both parties in the shtar, don't you leave this open to being exploited? Amrlo Abaye, no. Abaye says, this is what it means to say. Amrlo Abaye, Ha'achi Amarav, this is what Rav explained. Shem ha'ish beget, v'hu adin l'shem ha'isha. No. The witnesses and the sofer have to be able to recognize the name of the man in the get and also the woman in the get. Clearly, the sofer, the eidim have to recognize the names of all parties involved. Similarly, again, Shem ha'isha b'shover v'hu adin l'shem ha'ish. The witnesses have to recognize the name of the woman in the receipt and certainly the name of the man as well. So we'll say, so this is incredibly important. So therefore, what the Gemara is saying is like this. Really what the Mishnah is telling me is the sofer and the eidim could go ahead and activate the process based on the tzivoy, based on the command of the husband, let's say for a get, even though the wife is not there. But they do have to know that Reuven is married to Rachel. Right? They have to understand this couple. They do have to understand who exactly this is. Therefore, they have to have familiarity with the couple. Again, Rachel need not be there, but the witnesses and the sofer have to know that this guy Reuven is married to Rachel. Same thing on the shover, same thing on the receipt. Rachel could come and Rachel could initiate it even without her husband Reuven. But the witnesses and the sofer have to know that Rachel's husband's name is Reuven. Okay, so the Gemara says, okay, so now what you're telling me is, so I got it. So now the eidim and the sofer have to be familiar with the couple, but it can still be exploited. After all, v'leichush l'shnei Yosef ben Shimon Adar be'er achos. So remember again, what if there are two Yosefs? What happens if there are two couples, both named Reuven and Rachel. Are we concerned about that? In other words, if you're going to go ahead and write up a get for Reuven, right? What's to stop Reuven from going in and giving that to the other couple, right? To the other Rachel. To Rachel is not his wife, right? But the other Rachel, give it to her, and now she's going to claim that she's divorced from her husband. Isn't that exploitable as well? To which the Gemara says, Dilma kasev gita va'azul mimati le'isesad. Maybe Reuven is going to go to the sofa. He's going to say, listen, I'm divorcing my wife Rachel. They're going to write him up a get. What is he going to do? He's going to take the get and he's going to give it to the other Rachel. And she's going to produce it, and now she's able to claim that she's divorced. Amar Lahu is very, very interesting. Amar Lahu, Amar Lahu bar Huna, Hachi Amarav, is what Rav said, Shnei Yosef ben Shimon Hadaim be'irachos. When you have a situation of two couples with exactly the same name, Ein Megarshin Nishosein Elazeh Bifnezeh. They can only get divorced in presence of one another. Very interesting. Fascinating, right? In order to ensure that nothing over here is exploited, then halacha l'maisa, they have to go ahead and get divorced. In other words, if Reuven Rachel, couple one, right? Couple one, Reuven Rachel is getting divorced. Couple Reuven Rachel number two has to be present, right? This way, again, everyone sees which Reuven and Rachel are getting divorced. Fascinating. So the Gemara goes right to the Rashbam says over here. Rashbam says, because obviously once they're getting divorced in proximity to each other, there's nothing to worry about. Okay, incredible. I have a lechosh dilma asl azil lamasa achrisa umachsik leilishmei b'Yosef ben Shimon the kasev gita umimati le'isesad. Okay, so I will say this is actually very interesting. Why do we be concerned about the following? Maybe Reuven, right? Reuven is going to go move himself to a new city. And in this new city, he tells everyone, he establishes his name as Yosef ben Shimon. And he says that his wife is Rachel. Okay, so now you're telling me he could go to the sofer and he could say, okay, I'm Yosef ben Shimon, married to Rachel, write for me a get. And what is he going to do? Now, his name is not Yosef ben Shimon. His name is Reuven. But now he has a get that says Yosef ben Shimon divorced Rachel. He could give it to Rachel, right? The other Rachel, give it to Rachel, and divorce her with that get. And or not divorce her. And she could then furnish this, showing that she's divorced, when in fact she's not actually divorced. In other words, aren't we concerned about that? So this is very interesting. So the Gemara says, look, the only thing we could do, right? First of all, take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Rashbam, maybe Reuven is going to move to a different city. And what's going to happen? Maybe he's here So as I said, the issue just is over. The Gemara is raising like a general issue, which is, I don't understand, like, in general, why can't you exploit these situations? You've got a guy, Reuven, he moves to a new city, tells everyone his name is Yosef ben Shimon, and now what's to stop him ultimately, again, from divorcing his wife Rachel? Meanwhile, again, he can now give this get to Rachel, who actually is married to a Yosef ben Shimon. She could furnish this and pretend that she's divorced. To which the Gemara says, you're right. So we'll say the halacha is that in general, when you know someone, when they've been in a city for 30 days, and you know them to be established by a certain name, we're not choshesh for this anymore. In other words, once a person has solidified residency with 30 days, and we know his name, the chazok is that's his name, and I'm not going to be choshesh that maybe he's here under an alias. Look at the Rashbam, in choshesh and lo, the kol kach lo haya machlif shmo zman meruba pen yivada adavar. And as we'll say, to go, it's interesting. The Rashbam seems to say that a person might go ahead and change their name, just like for a moment or just for a brief period of time in order to get something done. But you run a risk of changing your name for a prolonged amount of time of being discovered. So because of that, if a person is established by a particular identity for 30 days, then that's the identity that they have. That's the identity that they have. So the Gemara says something interesting. The Gemara says, good. Lo is chazik mai. So what happens if this person's been here for less than 30 days? So how do you tell if they're lying or if they're not lying? Like what do you do? What do you do? So the Gemara says, Amar Abaye dekar leva ani. So Abaye says, here's how you could check. This is actually very interesting. Abaye says, call the guy by his name suddenly, without warning, dekar leva ani, and if he turns around and he answers, that shows it's his name. In other words, so interestingly enough, Abai is assuming over here that if somebody is operating under an alias, so they're only going to answer to it if they have time to prepare their response. But if you kind of catch them just like off guard a little bit, they won't respond. So if someone does respond to calling out their name and you call it out just without any warning, that's a pretty good indication that Lamaisa, that is their real name. So very interesting. The Karule, you call the guy without any warning. And what happens? Vani, and he answers. So that's even if he has less than 30 days residency, that's a pretty good indicator that the guy is telling the truth about his identity. Rav Zvid said, Rama'ah beramuse zahir. So this is actually pretty profound. So Rav Zvid says, not necessarily, because sometimes like good liars really know how to lie. Right? And a good liar who really knows how to lie will be sharp and will know to answer his name, even if halacha l'maisa, someone's calling it quickly. Rashbam says over here, B'ramuse, Yada ve'zahar lanos hilchach in takanalo ad l'schazek. So what's happening over here is as follows. So essentially, the halacha is like this. Once a person moves to a new place, and he's been there for 30 days, he has a chazaka that he's known by a certain name. The chazaka is, that's his name. And we're not worried that he's operating under an alias. But what happens if somebody comes to town less than 30 days? Somebody comes to town, he's been here less than 30 days. He wants to write a get for his wife. So what do? How do I check that he's not operating under an alias? So it's machlokes. So Abaye says, kind of catch him off guard. Call his name, right? You know, when you're behind him on the street, call, hey, Ruvain, Yosef ben Shimon. And if he turns around quickly, he hears his name, that's a good indication that it's not an alias, that's his true identity. If you call it, and it takes a little bit more time for him to respond, that may be an indication that perhaps he's operating under an alias. Now comes along Rav Zvid, and Rav Zvid says not necessarily. Sometimes people are really good liars. Right? And Lamaisa, again, they're able to go ahead and really keep their act together, keep the facade together. So even calling their name just quickly is not necessarily a raya. So as you know, it's interesting. It's interesting as follows, that, you know, if you think about this just like from a Musar Haskell perspective, right? So the Gemara says that when you go to a new place and you go by a certain name for 30 days, then halacha l'maisa, that's your identity. That's your identity, which I think may also be, I don't know, like a lot of times we try to go ahead and get good traction for affecting personal change in life. And sometimes it's very difficult. And we often think that in order for change to be real, so change has to last forever. And then when it doesn't last forever, we become incredibly frustrated. It's interesting that perhaps there's a model over here. And the model over here is when you establish yourself in a particular identity for 30 days, that's your identity. 30 is a significant number, of course, the unit of a month, a significant amount of time. And I think perhaps what the Musar Haskell in this is that as long as I could affect change for some significant unit of time, that's my new identity. Now, I think B'derech HaHashkafa, even if I go ahead and fall off the wagon, right? I slip back into previous behaviors, it doesn't change the fact that I changed my identity. I just have to establish for myself. Now, here in this halacha, it's a month, but maybe in a personal change, it's even less time. Right? Maybe for some of us, just the ability to get through a week without committing or engaging in a certain type of behavior. Or maybe it's even a day. One day, I get through the day without committing this particular avera, engaging in this negative behavior, having these negative traits. Whatever your amount of time is, just understand, when you get through a certain amount of time and a changed fashion, that concretizes and solidifies your changed identity. And even if I fall off the wagon again and I repeat my same negative mistakes of the past, it doesn't change the fact that I have created a new identity for myself. Once someone is in this city for 30 days, that's his name. And in life, once you sustain a positive behavior, once you sustain some type of personalistic change, even if it's not forever, but it's for some basic predetermined unit of time, predetermined by you. I decided I'm going to try this for a day, a week, a month, a year, whatever your predetermined unit is. Then halacha l'maisa, as long as I go out and I reach that, I'm a changed man. It's just, I think it's an interesting model to think about with change. So often, I'll just end with this. So often, right, we go ahead and when we think about change, we think about change forever. right? I'm doing tshuva forever. We're not going to take a show of hands about how many people have done tshuva that's supposed to last forever, but the tshuva hasn't lasted forever. Maybe the better way to do tshuva is to say, you know what? I'm becoming about tshuva for a week. I'm becoming about tshuva for a month. Set a short-term goal of personalistic change. Not a long-term goal. A short-term goal of personalistic change. This is my avoda. Not for the rest of my life. For a day, a week, a month, 2 months, 3 months, maybe a year. But set a short-term goal for change. And if you can reach that goal, just understand, you're a changed man. And once I've demonstrated to myself that I can become a changed man, then the ability to perpetuate that change, the ability to keep that change going, and the ability to get back up and restart that change after I fall down is so much easier because I've solidified my personalistic credentials as someone who has the ability to affect change in his identity. All right, Tabosai, stop over here for today. Again, as I mentioned before, I'm going to be remote for a good part of this week, but my goal is, Eretz Hashem, to keep learning with the Chavra every single day. I miss physically being with the Chavra, so at least like this, I get to be a little bit together with the Chavra. Wishing everyone a beautiful day, an uplifting day, and sheyichyeh, everyone.